right? You have to take some steps. You have to take some risks. You have to kind of get outside the comfort zone. And the comfort zone of what Amazon has been for the last few years, where growth at all costs is no longer there. Hello, hello. Welcome, everyone, to this Wednesday's edition of Trellis Webinars. I am Ali Babel, the Chief Evangelist here. I've got Dennis, our VP of Data Science as well. How you doing, Dennis?
Very good, very good. Thanks for having me. Looking forward to the chat.
It's no one else we'd rather have, that's for sure. It's a subtle nod towards our CPO, Krishna, who was here with us last week. I'm just kidding. But it's Wednesday's always an interesting day where it's that hump day. I think I need an extra coffee sometimes on these days, but it's the days where I'm often curious about what else is going on, or I'll spend a bit more time on learning a few different things as well. So hopefully people are excited for this one. This is not a lot of people talk about pricing.
Yeah, it should be a good one.
Yeah, Dennis and I have kind of combed through a bunch of different data sets here to really kind of pull out some examples of the pricing strategies that we work with our brands. But at the same time, showing how these actually work, and they're real pieces towards it. And so, without further ado, why don't we jump into it, Dennis?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. And so, off the hop right away, it's something that you've heard us say time and time and again, right? That 50% of every brand's GMV is taken by Amazon today, right? You've seen this through on Bloomberg, multiple articles. There's so many different places that have cited this or sourced this, and even talking to brands as well, that amount's only going up. And even more recently, Dennis, we were talking about this yesterday as well. There's a whole bunch of new fees.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, referral fees have been going up in the past. Most recently, it's more around kind of the logistics and warehousing side of it, the storage fees, long-term storage fees, all going up. Brands are getting pressed from multiple angles here on their profitability.
Yeah, and then even other things to consider as well, right? Like maintaining a minimum inventory amount now, which is a net new piece there as well, and getting dinged if I don't do that. And so it's we've already seen brands, and we've been talking about this for a while because we've been hearing it from brands, but profit has been kind of the focus as of last year, but even more so this year, right? Growth at all costs is not really where it needs to be. And it's entirely because of this, that it's becoming more and more expensive to sell on Amazon or sell on Marketplace as a whole.
And yet the brands can't give up on Marketplace. It's just such an important revenue channel for them. They cannot give up on it, but nonetheless, the margins are harder and harder to come by. So
exactly. And so to that you asked the same question that I have, like, what else can be done? And I think that when brands are asking us this question, when we're having these conversations with brands, the first question between Dennis and I we ask is, well, when's the last time you've changed your price? And Dennis, what kind of responses do you get for something like when you ask this question?
We like to ask this question pretty frequently with our brands, and it's surprising how many come back with the common answer of, we just don't. And then the question is why, right? Why don't you?
Yeah. And that's the interesting way. Like, I often get, like, sometimes I've gone like once a month, or I changed it because I needed, because I I was just it was too expensive. My cogs were too expensive, and I just increased the price.
Yep.
Or I just had an excess amount of inventory, and so I decided to change it. But there's no rhyme or reason. Like, it's and more often than not, that's like a small subset. But more often than not, the average or the answer that we've gotten the most is, I haven't changed it. And so that begs the next question, Dennis. Like, well, what's holding them back? Like, what's holding brands back from even wanting to change their price or consider changing the price? If I'm getting squeezed from the bottom line, no matter what, and the one thing that we control is our price, but I don't want to change it, and I'm not thinking about changing it, and what's holding them back?
There seems to be this kind of overwhelming kind of sense of fear or just uncertainty around what's going to happen if they start kind of quote unquote experimenting with their price, right? I don't know if is it going to significantly negatively impact my volumes if I go up in price, if I go down in price. Am I really going to get the benefit of the volume increase that I'm looking for? I just don't know, right? It's the biggest problem.
And I think you nailed it, right? It's fear. It's the risk of the unknown. And I hear that as well. It's like, well, I don't want to ruin what's working today. Like I don't want it to go the opposite way or to have a negative impact.
Yeah.
And again, like running any test can have a negative impact, but I feel it's often around price specifically that no one ever wants to run a test.
Yeah, I was just going to say the testing always is an option. I think brands recognize that, but at the same time, they also recognize that that's or at least they perceive it as a significant time
Yeah.
investment, and still the outcome is uncertain. And in the process, what kind of impact are they going to have on their
Yeah.
business? It's just a gamble. They don't feel like they're in a good position to take.
Yeah, and I think we appreciate the how the where the fear comes from and look at that. But we have so much data, we have so many signals on Amazon and on marketplaces as a whole, and the dynamic marketplace that it is, like it's not static, right? It's not like, hey, I just sent it to Costco or Target and they're going to put it on their shelves and that's my price and I'll let them know about a promo or a coupon. This changes every day. The market changes every day, and in turn, like the impacts are substantial, right? But at the same time, if we actually look at and I'm going to ask as we go through this, really, if we think about it, like what impact does price have for a brand, right? Between all those KPIs and all those data signals that are coming in, we ask ourselves that question, like what really are the impacts? And I know you and I've talked about this time and again. We've seen this through the data, and you've shown me this through the data, the correlation that price has towards really all of these pieces.
Exactly. It hits on all of these things. Some
Yeah.
more, some less, but to some extent or another, it's going to affect all of these parameters. Some of these are pretty obvious to I think a lot of our listeners, but some of these might be a little bit more surprising. Where we actually see a particularly strong correlation to price is actually on click through rate. Actually, of all of these, there's a really strong influence there.
Yeah.
That may or may not be kind of intuitive uh, to our viewers. So there's, I mean, it touches on all of these things.
Yeah. And like at the end of the day, like what else can you impact, right? Like price impacts everything.
Right.
But fundamentally it says that price is important, right? And so I can appreciate the fear, right? I can appreciate the things that makes people be concerned about it, and not have a willingness to test it out because it impacts so much and it has so much of an opportunity to move those metrics. But the inverse is also true, right? That if we're scared about the negative, then at the same time, the positive entirely is possible as well, right? That if we're going to do everything, if we're not going to ever do anything because we're worried about all the other things, we're never going to get anywhere on the other side of it as well, right? You have to take some steps, you have to take some risks, you have to kind of get outside the comfort zone, and the comfort zone of what Amazon has been for the last few years, where growth at all costs is no longer there,
Yep.
right?
And
And we're all being uncomfortable.
more brands are recognizing that. So I think we're still in relatively early stages, but brands are adopting a more kind of dynamic posture on
Yeah.
pricing, and that trend is only going to increase. And those brands that are maybe a little bit more conservative or passive and not wanting to change that price could be left kind of leaving margin on the table there as well.
Absolutely, absolutely, right? Like if competitors are doing this, is happening either way, and we see it happening in the market within categories, as well. Then what are we doing here, right? And I think it was a few weeks back. It was where Wendy's made a huge announcement that they're going to be changing all their screens to
Yeah.
even have dynamic pricing within their stores, right? Like
Yeah,
this
it's not just an e-commerce phenomenon. It's happening in many aspects.
Exactly, right? We see it with airlines already. We're all comfortable paying that Uber surge fee as well. We know we play the game, and it's cheaper to buy tickets on Tuesdays, and the airlines put cookies on our browsers, and they know what we're shopping for. We all know as consumers are well aware of it, but as brand owners, as e-commerce, knowing that price is important, knowing that changing your price is important, and everyone recognizes that, right? Like industries have already recognized that. It's now time for us to catch up. To answer that, though, is what is the right price, right? To figure that out, what is the right price? How do I figure that out, Dennis? What's my path here?
Well, the path is interesting. I think we're going to get into that. But what is the right price is the first order question here, and the answer is it changes. It's there isn't a single right answer here.
Yeah,
At any point in time there is a right answer, but that right answer is changing on us dynamically all the time.
yeah, and some brands have figured this out, right? Exactly what we talked about. In order to not be left behind, there's an average of about 2.5 million price changes per day on Amazon, right? So that's 30 price changes every second. Like this isn't a small amount by any means. And so if your competitors already changed their price, brands have already figured that out and they're doing this already, then what do they know? What's the secret sauce here? What gives them the comfort and the willingness to go in and change their price and make those modifications? And really, it's as simple as, and for those of you who have seen any of our pricing chats before, we'll go into a bit more depth here towards that with the strategies, but they know their price elasticity of demand for their products, right? And um, economic concept as well, we'll go through it. And what that is really the percentage change in demand over the percentage change in price. And it's figuring that piece out where we're all comfortable with spreadsheets, we're all comfortable with dialing reports, but understanding that what was my demand at price X, which could be $20, and what was my demand at $25, and doing that test on the market to start getting a data set around the price elasticity of demand. But they know something else, Dennis. It's not just the price elasticity of demand. They know one more piece, and it's their profit sensitivity, right? That at what price points am I going to have what profit, right? And so, Dennis, why don't you talk to us about profit sensitivity?
So this is just about how, I mean, intuitively, everybody kind of understands that profits are directly impacted by price. What we're looking at with profit sensitivity is that relationship, is how is that profit changing over the range of prices that we care about understanding or care about analyzing. And what that tends to do is create kind of when you combine volume in here. So when we're talking profit here, we're not just talking percentage margin. We're actually talking about overall kind of volume profit. So as we're flexing those price points, our margins are changing, but so are our volumes based on that demand elasticity that we talked about on the previous slide. And when you bring those two together, it creates a kind of a profitability curve that tends to peak at a certain point. And it's important to know where that peak point lies for any given product, any given category that we're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. And so when you have these two things together, it's the combination of these two data sets is where people find their comfort, is where these brands find their comfort, right? That they have an understanding of the relationship between price and demand, and the relationship between profit and price as well, right? And so when you combine these two, you get two kind of components here, which is really the optimal price and the best price. And the best way to see this is when you take all those data sets and then you graph them onto the same plane. It looks something like this, right? And so, Dennis, explain this visual here if you can, and what people should be looking for and how they should be looking at this visual.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So this is a simplified view of those two kind of key metrics that we just talked about. So the demand elasticity and the profit sensitivity. So the demand elasticity is the one that's the purple kind of straight line sloped in a downward direction here. So that's kind of intuitively right. As we raise our prices, the market will give us feedback of less and less demand, and in the opposite direction, the converse is true. So that's a pretty straightforward relationship. Of course, the slow, the pace at which volume is dropping off or rising is the key variable. That's what we need to measure and calibrate towards for any given product or category. And then the pink curve is that profit sensitivity curve that I was just talking about, that kind of peaks at a certain point. And what we're looking to see is where is that peak point on that profit sensitivity. And the reality is the dynamic nature of the marketplace is such that these curves flex and they change. And so the actual optimal price over time is going to change. We're going to see that in an upcoming slide. And what we're looking to do is work within a range, a best price range that is kind of above and below kind of that optimal price. We'll see that kind of illustrated shortly.
Yeah, and it'll be different for everyone. It'll look a little bit differently, and I think you nailed it there as well, right? Like that purple line and the whether it's like as steep as this is or a little bit flatter, and everyone else, you might have a longer profit sensitivity curve, like when you actually start graphing these pieces out. But fundamentally, when these two come together, is where you get your optimal price.
That's right. And this is where the testing and experimentation comes in that brands are so nervous or reluctant to undertake, because it does require a lot of data to kind of figure out exactly how these curves are relating to one another.
Yeah, and again, with a lot of data, a lot of that to define that in a bit more clarity, Dennis. When we see this with brands without any historical price changes before and wanting to test this out and profile that, we normally are able to get an understanding of that within 4-6 weeks.
Yeah, usually, yeah, give or take. It all depends on the velocity of the category that we're talking about, but yeah.
and again, no one is by no means are we saying do massive price swings, because Amazon isn't like that either. But move 5%, 10% from that. This is what I know my MSRP is. Let me go up 5%, or let me go down 5%, and then keep kind of expanding there to understand the demand of those units to give you a pretty clear idea there. And so you can figure that out quite quickly, whether it be from a sales velocity standpoint of, let's say I'm going to increase my price by 5%, and I'm going to do it for as long as for my first 20 units, right? That, and every 20 unit sales, I'm going to measure it that way, right? And so ideally, all things staying the same to get you to this point, but ultimately, the two things you're looking at are always is my optimal price and my best price. And when we look to define what each one is, and we've talked about it here, but optimal price is really the price at which you achieve peak profit and peak volume, right? So if you recall that graph, if I go to the right or go to the left of that, my volume or my profit my volume and profit will change, right? My volume might go up, my profit goes down. Or on the other side of it, my volume might go down, but again, my profit goes down as well. Or my profit goes up, but it's not the peak point there too. So you're trying to find that main point. Now, the best price though, that's that 5 to 10% to 15% range that hovers around that optimal price, right? That it's that window of which we can comfortably be within, and be happy to be within as we go to market, right? And that's the theory behind it, right? But when we actually look at how something like this plays out in market, and I'll throw it over here to Dennis as well, we actually see how the optimal price changes.
Yeah, exactly. And these can be for a number of factors. It's typically going to be seasonalities will certainly play a role in this. The ebbing and flowing of the competitive landscape are also going to play roles in here. So that optimal price is going to change. It's not going to stay static. And what we're trying to do with kind of our best price approach is kind of work within a range above and below, and continually kind of sampling and seeing how that demand elasticity is flexing, seeing how the profit sensitivity is flexing over different price points, and adapting the price on an ongoing basis to stay as close as possible to that optimal price.
Yeah, and so really, and as much as we're showing this in a static environment, and we see it how it plays out in market, is that the optimal price changes, right? And it's exactly what we said before. In working with all these brands, the right price changes, and that optimal price is that right price, and it will change. It should change, and it'll change day over day with how the market's performing and how the market's reacting as well, along with your own sales velocity and metrics there too. But depending on your strategy as well, the optimal price changes. And this is really what we're here to talk about: is that
Right.
where you want your optimal price to be is entirely dependent on the strategy that you have. That, what am I trying to ascertain, or what am I trying to attain for each one of these products, whether it
Yeah,
be from
objective
increasing my
strategy.
profit,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
right? And so let's like, and so what are like, I know we have some strategies coming up here, Dennis, but what are some of the impetus that are the reasons that people will go and say, why should I change my price? I know the topic of this one is increasing my profits. That's an easy one, right? Where I want to eke
Yeah,
out more profit for every sale that I have.
that's right.
But what are some other ones that
Yeah,
you've heard from
a couple
brands?
of easy ones right off the top would be, yeah, eking out additional margin is obviously one that does come up pretty frequently. The other one that
Yeah.
tends to come up pretty often, and brands experience this all the time, is occasionally we might run into an overstock situation, and maybe we need to run a clearance. And so pricing is obviously going to be an important lever towards executing any kind of a clearance goal. So that's another one that comes up pretty often.
Yeah, and like I think the other side of it as well is that how do we know that price impacts many things, and so how do I leverage my price to maintain a sales velocity, for example,
Right.
or
Right.
to make sure that I'm consistently selling things through? I think that's the biggest piece, especially when we start are looking at inventory turnover, and we start factoring in some of the new rules from Amazon here, where I need to maintain 28 days of inventory. I want to have some level of predictability as to when I'm going to run out of my inventory, and sufficiently what is everyone calls our sell-through rate, right? That,
Right.
what's the relationship there? Will I run out of my inventory before my next inventory comes in, and will I now be dinged another fee? How do I avoid that? And that's one of the conversations I know you and I actually have with brands as well.
That's right.
And so there's so many different things that you need to consider now with all these additional fees. But again, just in terms of grazing your profit, and we've distilled them down to kind of like the four key strategies that we've run for brands and we recommend to brands as well, depending on their products, their catalog, the life cycle of their products as well. And we'll go through kind of in a real life example of each. But quite simply, we look at a balanced strategy, we look at a clearance strategy, maintaining BSR and a competitive edge, and where the all things we kind of briefly talked about just now, where balance is all about high increasing our profit margins, where I don't want to go too far off that optimal price. I want to kind of stay within that optimal price. I'm always getting as much profit as I possibly can at any given point in time. Clearance being about how do we look at our inventory and decrease our price, but while still maintaining profit to sell through our inventory, while also being able to have as much profit as we possibly can towards that.
Yep.
Our BSR is I want to maintain the same BSR, right? And we
Yep.
all know BSR is all about is it correlated to sales velocity as well. And so, how do I leverage my price to maintain the rank that I have for my products?
That one
And
tends
then,
to draw from the first two in some ways in terms of
yeah,
wanting to kind of maintain and optimize around a certain sales velocity towards that all important BSR objective. And
yeah,
for many of kind of the mid-market brands who've worked long and hard to establish certain BSR rankings within their category, they don't want to lose ground on that. They know that the competition is going up within their space. They're going to apply some pricing strategies towards kind of either maintaining or even taking a step improvement towards their BSR.
yeah. And the last one we touched on it earlier in this talk, in the talk as well here, but the competitive edge, where we have our competitors are taking the strategy, right?
Yeah.
They're leveraging a dynamic pricing strategy. And so staying in lockstep with them and where you want to be positioned within the market to consumers is equally as important, right? And so this is a bit more reactive than some of the other ones here. But the idea being that I'm in a category that's ultra competitive, that's hyper competitive, where other competitors are changing their price frequently and employing these strategies. And I want to be in the same marketplace position, or the same positioning within that marketplace or within that shelf that I want to, and I want to maintain that, and I want to stay within that. And so let's actually jump into it and go into examples of each one. Um, and so Dennis, why don't you talk to our balance strategy here?
Yeah, so this is one where we're wanting to kind of generally speaking, we're going to apply the balance strategy for those brands who are looking to just drive up kind of overall cash flow into the business, if you will, if you think of it at a very high level. So what they're wanting to do is grab margin where it's available, allow prices to flex upwards when demand is indicating that there's opportunity to do so, but also recognize that in some situations, either price driven or due to externalities, there might be some drop in that that demand elasticity curve, and so correspondingly they're going to want to bring that price down. So what we see in this example is where that price point is flexing, plus or minus $1 around kind of that kind of nominal price point as the demand as we see demand strengthening within the space. Prices are kind of incrementally working their way upwards. And then as demand softens over periods of time, then the price point will come down accordingly, and all towards kind of maintaining an optimal balance between volume and margin together.
Yeah, and you see that, right? Like there's a 4 different or 5 different price changes here, but everything's kind of moving up and down around that $21 mark there. But sufficiently, as you kind of see the increase in demand here with the units, you can see that we started lifting up the price a few days later, saying that we've sustained a good amount of demand at this price point. Can we sustain the same level of demand at this price point? And really all about driving more profit, and to Dennis's conversation there earlier, as well as cash flow too, right? That let's when we see those things moving, let's actually our first order here is what's our sales velocity and can we eke out more profit? Clearance. Talks about clearance, Dennis.
So yeah, so this is actually an interesting example where even in a clearance model, we don't want to necessarily give up margin unnecessarily. Our primary objective is to get to a sell-through rate that allows us to clear out an overstock situation. That's objective number one. And so the tendency, generally speaking, will be for price points to generally come down in order to improve that sell-through rate. But at the same time, if we've got eyes on the signals coming in, and there's opportunity for us to not leave margin on the table unnecessarily, then this is an example where we're able to achieve kind of the objective sell through rate and still incrementally get additional margin where it presents itself as an opportunity. So here we see, demand generally trending in the right direction, even though our objective was to move sell through. And correspondingly, kind of again on an incremental basis, never making kind of huge swings, but just grabbing incremental margin where we can.
Yeah. And that's the interesting part, right? Like it's like setting a low price that we're comfortable with while still maintaining profitability, and then adjusting based on like that demand, right? Like that sell through rate that we're going after, that we can attain that. Let's actually see if we can have a bit more profitability around the way. And this one I find super interesting, and seeing this one play out, because if for us, and of course we leverage AI and automation to make these changes based on the data signals we're seeing. But for us, the interesting part was, that the price kept going up. As much as this was our floor price to get us to the number of units and get to that sell through rate, with the demand, you can, and even getting into the end here, even with an 1875, which is $1.50 more than we had started the price point with, or started it with, you're seeing on that March 25th. And again, everyone, this is data as good as of yesterday. Like this is in market. These are things playing out today. You can, at 1875, look at that demand, right? Like that number of units, it was the most we've had since the 13th. The number of units moved on that day at a higher price point than we initially even thought was or we were capable of getting.
Yeah.
And so super interesting, right? Like it's when anyone wants to clear out inventory, we often, whenever we talk to brands about this, everyone's like, well, I kind of just like lick my finger, put it to the air, and take a guess as to how much I should spend, or how much I should drop it off by.
And for all kinds of pragmatic reasons, it's usually a set and forget type of an approach, right? I know I need to clear out inventory. I'm going to drop my price by 25% or whatever the case may be, and I just kind of leave it there until I kind of get my inventory down to a better place, and that's all fine and good. But if you're able to kind of increase the frequency of kind of the signals that you're looking at, you're able to then actually be a little bit more nimble and be a little bit more dynamic and grab available margin, like this example is showing, when it presents itself.
And the other interesting part on this one is the ability for us to add in advertising now, right? Like with we discounted it to a point where it was like just a bit above margin. We're still making some with no advertising, but with adding this back on, we can actually double down, like couple these two things together and drive more page views there, right? There's a bit more budget there available towards spending that towards an advertising side of things now too.
Yep.
And so we can clear out that inventory even faster while still being profitable, right? So there's there's interesting pieces there. This one's a bit more of a complex graph here. Again, Dennis, talk to us about what we're seeing here.
So the idea here is to keep a close eye on how BSR is reacting to the different price points. As I said, it's kind of drawing a little bit from the two previous models where in some ways, BSR is kind of our proxy for increasing or decreasing demand. But in this scenario, the brand's primary objective is to either maintain or in some cases even incrementally improve on BSR. And so that's the overriding objective. And that's typically going to be tied to sales velocity and sales velocity for the product. And so here, as we see kind of BSR softening in any way, then the price points will kind of incrementally kind of adjust downwards in an attempt to improve volumes and kind of get that BSR back to the objective number, and we kind of see that playing out towards the tail end of this sequence here.
Yeah, and this is the interesting part, right? Where if I want to maintain this BSR, the risk would have been that if we didn't actually make any price changes, that 311 that we see from the BSR, like this is all kind of a step function, right? That we saw the 311, the BSR, the price changed, and that as a result of that as well. And so as much as we're reporting it on the same day here, or showing it in this graph, so in theory, this would have just been the rank would have kept dropping, right? Like if we actually let this play out as is, without leveraging the lever of price, that rank would have gone worse and worse and worse. And you're often kind of felt holding the bag and be like, I don't know why my rank's dropping. It's important for me to kind of stay within this area, albeit this is at 250 here, but it's important for me to stay within this range. Without looking at the price or without making any changes to price, you might not actually be able to control that, if at all. And so it's a super interesting perspective to take when it's like the risk of not doing something is actually more impactful, right? What we were talking about before is I'm scared of doing it. But now if you start looking at this data, if you don't do it, you're actually doing worse for your brand.
And I think we see that even more so in the next example. But yes, absolutely.
Tell us, go for it.
So here's where, we've been seeing evidence of this kind of, incrementally over the past couple of years, that more and more brands are recognizing the importance of being dynamic with their price and allowing for some price changes to occur in order to achieve whatever their objectives may be. And so if we're not as competitive brands within a given category, if we're not watching for that and adapting to what they're doing as well, then that can put us, in a disadvantaged situation. So here's a case where this particular brand is kind of locked in on this competitor, wanting to kind of stay within a 10% margin to remain competitive. So their primary objective is still to improve margins where applicable, but not allowing themselves to kind of get out of range, if you will, relative to the competition. And we can see in this example where the competition was in fact actually making some adjustments in price in the first half, more in a downward direction, in the latter half more in an upward direction. And so then our brand is then kind of following along with that kind of competitive move.
Yeah, and so staying that 10% lower, like again, you if that wasn't there, that price would have just stayed consistent all the way through, right? And would we have seen and what would that impact have been towards the units being sold as a result of that? Where some of these scenarios would have been that at some point or another, the actual price that we have, as much as we want to be below the competitor, we might have been higher than that, right? And now that's going to have a negative impact on our ability to sell our product. In turn, our number of units that we sold, our cash flow, all of these things, and our profitability, but also our BSR, our rank, our like so many variables will get impacted there,
and not losing sight of where we are on that profit sensitivity curve, and making sure that we're not getting ourselves into
exactly
into kind of a negative margin or even a break even situation at that point.
Yeah, and so we have the guardrails in place here to be able to support that. And so if you say that, like, if we look at this, if we maintaining that 10% below the competitor, like if we look at the units are staying. It's actually we're seeing a growth, right? We're seeing these units go up. The overall units go up. There was a little bit of a drop off here when the price went up. And in the same vein, our competitors recognize that too, likely, right? That they went to 1575 anticipating a similar sales velocity from the previous days, because they're probably seeing a similar effect, drop back down to 15. And now we're seeing and that was like one of the largest drops. I think the 75-cent drop was like the largest drop that happened for our competitor, in turn for us too. Yep. And we saw the largest sales velocity or the sales volume of any of the days within this 14-day look back. And so it's you can there's all these things are correlated, right? We've talked about BSR, we talked against your competitors, we talked about volume, we've talked about balance, we talked about clearance as well. And so if I were to ask you now, and I were to ask you this question, if you could make more money than you're making now with leveraging any of these strategies, would you? Right? And I think the simplistic version of this answer is going to be yes, right? And so then fundamentally, it's time to change your price, right? And become one of those thousands of brands. And the answer to the question of it changes is because it does. And it's time for you to do that too, right? Don't let the fear stop you. Don't let the lack of data stop you. You can go and get the data. You can go and enable yourself to be a competitor and winning in that category through your price, and becoming more profitable with your price as well. Any questions? Throwing this out there to the ether here. See if anything pops in here. I always like looking at the examples there, Dennis. I think that it when we start going through it, you start seeing like the impact that price has across the board, and being intentional about the strategies. I think that's what people often forget too. You have to have a plan. You have to know what you're doing and why you're doing it.
It starts with a goal for sure, and there, it's no different than any other aspect of merchandising. We got to be crystal clear about what our objective is and why, and then there's a number of different strategies that can be thrown towards getting there.
Yeah. Okay. We got a question. It just says LinkedIn user for us over here. So really nice to meet you, Mr. or Mrs. User. Can the system factor in natural day of the week fluctuation, i.e., weekends? I'm going to throw over to you, Dennis. Here, you're a VP of data science, so tell us.
Yeah, so I guess there's two aspects to the question in terms of like should you worry about kind of day of the week fluctuations, and the answer there is absolutely yes. It is important. There are different different patterns in terms of day of week trends that come out very clearly for just about any brand in any category. And then to the question of does our system kind of factor that in? Absolutely yes. It's a very important consideration because you don't want to necessarily just be reacting to an intra-week seasonality that might be playing out. In terms of seeing a sales velocity drop on one day or rise on another day could be nothing more than the typical weekly seasonal pattern that plays out within the category. So it's something that we have to look at pretty closely and correct for accordingly.
Dennis, I'm going to take it one step further here. What are your thoughts on hourly changes?
Yeah, so interesting. A lot of interesting insights coming out of hourly analytics that are now pretty readily available on most platforms. And yeah, they do tell an interesting story. We see, and actually we see a bit of a mix across a range of categories. We have some categories where kind of volumes drop and I mean, if we look at it in the context of advertising as an example, right? So volumes might drop temporarily over certain periods of the day, but so do click-throughs. Overall, kind of the effectiveness of advertising, the profitability kind of stays more or less constant throughout the day. Other cases, not at all, where we see very kind of significant swings. A lot of interesting insights, being gleaned around kind of patterns of CPCs over the course of the days through intraday. Intraday analytics. So a lot of really interesting stuff. Different topic, different day maybe, but a lot of cool stuff there too.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if there's anything else coming in here as well, but I will. I don't see anything yet, and we'll give it another 30 seconds here. I think one of the caveats towards all this as well, not caveats, but one of the tips that we've always pushed here, and looking at profit per session, right? Like all these changes we've looked at through profit per session, we actually make our change as a result of seeing if we're driving more or less. And depending on our strategy, we actually are trying to drive more or less as well. And so a negative or positive indicator is going to reflect whether or not our strategies are actually working.
Yeah, what the profit per session really starts to give us a little bit of insight into, as much as we're big proponents that there's a lot of influence coming in from multiple aspects of merchandising, and they all tie together. At the same time, it's also important to know, kind of on a more kind of a narrow scope, like is pricing doing what I need it to be doing is the fundamental question that we ask ourselves in the context of dynamic pricing, and that's where profit per session can really be of tremendous value, because it then kind of isolates a little bit what pricing is doing versus what the rest of our merchandising activities are doing. And if I'm moving my profit per sessions up, that's great. That's kind of what I want my dynamic pricing to be doing. And then if I need to increase volume because I'm in a good place from a profitability point of view or a margin point of view, then I can lean on other aspects of merchandising, whether that's promos, whether it's ads, whether it's other aspects of my merchandising activities to start to drive that volume into the listings. So.
Yeah, and like like again, pricing is only one aspect within kind of your merchandising toolkit, and it's one vehicle towards kind of attaining your overall brand goals.
That's it. Exactly.
And doubling down on that is that if all of a sudden you stop running ads and you're trying to run a pricing strategy, or you're stop bringing traffic to your page, or your rank is dropping, whatever case may be, pricing isn't going to be your do all end all winning for across the board, and it's not going to be your like this magic wand that
it's just another tool in the tool belt, and it does require multiple tools here for us multiple levers here for any brand to get the most out of their merchandising, for sure.
Right. So at this point, like everyone recognizes Amazon's pay to play, so maintaining your advertising spend, right? And so the through line of what we're talking about at this point is saying, don't change the other things you're doing, right? Like if you want to look at pricing, you want to make impactful changes, but turning things off to run a dynamic pricing strategy is actually going to be negatively impactful, right? And it's kind of a pro tip that we like to give out to people as well. Maintain your traffic, maintain your sources of traffic, and leverage dynamic pricing to eke out more profit or less profit, depending on the strategy you're running, to get you to that end goal for your brand, right?
That's right.
Whether it be profitable growth or clearing out inventory or maintaining your rank or whatever it may be.
Yep.
And so it's super important that you look at this as one of the tools in your tool belt. And we're going to keep talking about the merchandising tool belt over time here as well. But that is sufficiently it. That is dynamic pricing. Thank you all for coming. If you do have any other questions, feel free to email either myself or Dennis. I put both the email addresses. We put them both underneath here as well. But it's ali@gotrellis.com or dennis@gotrellis.com. We're always excited to keep doing this. We're going to be doing another one in a couple weeks, and looking beyond the pricing side. And could be an interesting one here, Dennis, where I don't know, we won't let the cat out of the bag yet. I'm going to park that there. Sure, but 2 weeks from now,
there's lots of goodies that we could talk about. But thanks again for having me. It was a great chat, and looking forward to the next one.
Thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day.